Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and welcome to the Stewards room, where we'll be taking a look at racing incidents submitted by you guys and trying to make a determination on who, if anyone, was at fault. There's a link in the description to submit your own clips, and feel free to check out the playlist link for more of these videos, specifically the first, which acts as a scene setter. Also, keep an eye out for cards popping up on screen towards the end of each segment, where you can vote on who you thought was at fault for each incident. So our first clip is on GTA, and it should be a pretty easy one to decide, and it's just to give us a bit more of a reintroduction to around the outside overtakes. So we're coming up here, and we're in the photo, so we've gotten an overtake on the inside, and then we end up having someone try to overtake us around the outside, and it doesn't pay off. So before we slow it down and look into it deeper, we're just going to go back to the Rules of Racing document that's linked in the description that we always use for these clips. And specifically about outside overtakes, we have covered it in more depth in previous videos, so feel free to check those from the playlist. But we'll give us a bit of a quick bit of a refresher for going around the outside. So the guiding principle, as it says here, is that the driver on the outside should be at least level. That means front axle in line with front axle, with the driver on the inside to have a claim to the racing line on corner exit. As you can see here, front axle to front axle. That is where you have to be at the very exit of the corner, which means really to be able to do that, since you're going to have to carry more speed around the outside, which really means that you should be ahead of the car on the inside at various stages to then be able to be level at the exit of the corner. And it's the positions of the cars at the exit of the corner that matters when going around the outside, not at the entry or the apex. So if the driver is behind at corner exit, they must leave space for the driver on the outside. If the driver on the inside is behind at corner exit, they must leave space for the driver on the outside. If the driver on the inside is ahead at corner exit, it is the duty of the driver on the outside to back out or take evasive action to avoid a collision. As you can see here, we've got the driver on the outside is level at this point, but then falls behind by this point. So on the exit, that's the point where the driver on the outside should be braking and backing out of the corner, as you can see there, because the driver on the inside is well within his rights to continue to take the racing line, because the driver on the outside isn't level at corner exit. So we're back to the clip, slowing it down, and as we can see, we go for a defensive position on the inside of the corner on the entry. The attacking driver on the outside comes with better speed, almost gets it done, but if we pause it here, obviously at the apex of the corner, we can see that the attacking driver around the outside is, it's almost front axle to rear axle, so he's nowhere near close enough at that point. And then if we continue it on, we see that as we come to corner exit, the attacking driver around the outside is nowhere near front axle to front axle. He needs to be sort of up here to have any claim to any space on this part of the track. So our driver on the inside is now, because the driver on the outside isn't far enough up the outside, he is well within his rights to then continue the racing line, and it's the duty of the driver on the outside to back out of it, which doesn't end up happening, and there's a little bit of a crash, a little bit of an incident, but that is really, just because the driver on the outside didn't back out of the corner. So a pretty easy one to start us off, just to sort of reintroduce us to the idea of what you need to do if you're going around the outside to have an outside overtake done, and what the rules are regarding outside overtakes and what the car who's defending on the inside is allowed to do. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, and in the poll in the top right there'll be a little card popping up that will allow you to vote on who you thought was at fault for this incident. But a pretty simple one. It does get a little bit more complicated than this, especially in the next clip, which we're going to see in a few seconds. So yeah, vote on this one and then we'll move on to the next one. So our next clip, we're on F1 2019, 18, 17, I don't know, they're all the same. I think it's 2018. Yeah, we coming around the outside here, and you would almost be, forgiven for looking at that and thinking, what was the incident there? It kind of looks a little bit innocuous, but we are going to see it from another perspective as well. So here it is from the angle and the perspective of the car that was being overtaken, comes around the outside and kind of knocks into him, but this one is going to require a bit of thought about who was at fault for this. So the first thing that I want to note is the car in the lead obviously takes a defensive position. He moves over to the left-hand side of the track. That's absolutely fine. He moves back over to the right, but then there's a little bit of inconsistency in his movements towards the end of the track. Now, we've covered this before in previous episodes, but we will have a check-up of it on the rules of racing. You're allowed to make one defensive move during a straight to defend your position. Now that's what he's done there. He's moved over to the left hand side of the track. That's his defensive maneuver. And you are allowed to then move to the right again to, say, retake your position for the next corner, as long as you leave one car width to the right of your car, or left if the upcoming corner is a right-hander. But what we see, so he to be fair, he does that. He does move over to the right gradually, and then stays in somewhat of a defensive posture and allows one car width, as we can see there. But then we also see a secondary movement towards the right. Just there. It's not much, but you can certainly see it. And we can see it from this perspective as well. So we move to the right a little bit, move to the left, and then another movement to the right, just there. It's not much, but it is a little bit naughty, honestly, because you are only allowed to make one move, and if you're retaking your position for the next corner, you're not meant to be, weaving about in the braking zone, and that's what the leader did there. As we can see here, one of the first aspects of the rules of racing document is the one move rule. When one driver is completely ahead of another on a straight, they are permitted to make a move in one direction. The move can be of any size within the track limits, and the move can be made as slowly or as quickly as the driver likes. They can jink suddenly to one side, or they can spend an entire straight gradually shifting across the track. More than one change of direction on a straight is called weaving and is not permitted. And as we've seen from the specific episode where we talked about it, taking the one move rule to its limits, drivers have often bent the rule of one move by arguing that their second move is part of their racing line for the corner that follows the straight. So, you move over to defend, and this is pretty much exactly what we saw on the clip. Move over to defend the inside of the corner, and then move back over to the outside of the track to then take the racing line. Now, that is considered acceptable, with one important caveat, as it says right here. When the defender moves back to the outside, they must leave at least one car width between themselves and the edge of the track. Which, again, that is what we saw. The leading driver on the clip did actually do that. Now, important point here is entering the braking zone. So on a straight, a defending driver has the right to suddenly change direction, even using the entire track width if they are fully ahead of the attacking driver. The same right does not apply in or immediately before the braking zone for a corner. Sudden changes of direction just before or within the braking zone are considered extremely dangerous, as they can leave the attacking driver nowhere to go. So we've brushed up on the rules that can be used and what you can do on straight, and we see that the leader, he moves over, makes his one move to the left-hand side of the track to defend his position. He gradually moves back over to the right to retake his racing line, which is fine because he does leave one car width around the outside. But I would also say that the move, he does, move to the right there, as we can see. Then he, moves back to the left, and then he jinks to the right again just as we've got into the braking zone right there. And I feel like that isn't acceptable to be, weaving about like that just before the braking zone. Even though it's a little bit of, it's not exactly an awful lot of movement. It's still enough to, everybody who's driving these cars, they're humans, they're going to react to something like that. So little things like that, I would say aren't allowed, but we need to look at the entire picture before we can lay blame to, everybody. So as we're looking at this, we see the driver on the outside, brakes much later, turns in for the corner, locks up, misses the apex, but still manages to make the corner, which is, pretty impressive, to be honest. A little bit of oversteer on the exit, but makes the corner. And from this angle, it kind of looks like nothing really happened. But then when you look from the other angle, we can see what does happen. So as we can see from this angle, the final movement to the right, and then the attacking driver comes around the outside. And basically, as you can see there, he brakes later, but then doesn't take into account that someone is still there. And he turns into the corner at a pretty high speed. Now, we're going to look at the rules again for this, because there's a certain part about this about how you can turn in. So again, going around the outside, this time we're not looking at what happens at corner exit, but we're actually looking at what happens when a collision occurs on corner entry and at the apex. So if the driver going around the outside is already more than half a car length ahead by the apex, they are entitled to cut into the inside along the racing line. But the problem here for me is that this happens before the apex of the corner, and you could argue that here at this point, the car on the outside is more than half a car length ahead, so is entitled to cut in to the apex of the corner. But I would argue that this is we're not even at the apex yet. You know, the apex of the corner is here. We've got all this distance to go. Just going down the outside like this and then cutting into the left when someone is clearly still here, that is not going to work, and that's not acceptable. What you've essentially done at that point is just driven to the outside of someone and turned into them. And, you know, the space is being occupied by another driver. You can't just do that. You have to be able to leave enough space on the inside to allow them to make the corner as well. And if you do that and then there's still contact, then it's on the fault of the person on the inside for not controlling the car well enough, even though you've left enough space. That didn't happen here. You know, this is the entry to the corner, and already contact has been made, and we're nowhere near the apex. So really, he shouldn't have been turning in anywhere near as early as this. You know, maybe continued a little bit further down. He probably still would have got the overtake done, to be honest, because he braked so much later, and he had such an overspeed. If he'd gone a bit further up in a straight line, then cut in, he probably would have been fine, and he even makes the corner with the contact. So from the perspective of the Williams on the outside, it was a good overtake, but you can't just turn in when somebody is there anyway. And that's my determination for this, that it was just too much of a turn in. You know, someone is still there, regardless of, you know, it was certainly naughty, the movements that were done. And if anything, this final movement to the right from the Sauber, it probably exacerbated this a little bit, because, you know, if he'd kept going straight, the Williams may have thought that he had more space than what he did. So it's a tricky one to really put blame wholly on one person or another, but I would have to put more of the blame on the Williams for causing the collision by, you know, turning in too early. You can't just go around the outside and turn in when someone is still there. You know, you can't just occupy a space that's already being occupied. I wouldn't say that it was entirely the fault of the Williams. You know, I do think that the Sauber has some blame to take on this for the multiple movements in the braking zone, and you know, leaving less space than what he initially did because of that final movement towards the right. But ultimately, I would say maybe 70-30 or 75-25, something like that on the Williams. I would probably be putting the Williams more at fault for this than, you know, anything that the Sauber did. You could argue that, you know, because he was only halfway along, he was halfway ahead, it's equal fault. But I think, you know, that the movements in the braking zone, you might decide that was more, you know, worse than what it was, so you might put the Sauber at fault. But for me, I think the Williams bears more of the fault for this one. But it's a tricky one, so let me know your thoughts in the comments. You know, let me know your perspective on this. Vote obviously in the poll in the top right as well, that will pop up on the card. Let me know what you think. It's a close one, because I think both of them are at fault for certain aspects of this. And, you know, to be honest, when I first saw it, I thought, wow, that was a great overtake by the Williams, because I only, you know, the first perspective of it that I watched was this one from the Williams perspective, and it does seem like a great overtake. But like I said, you can't just turn in as if nobody is there. And I would say that's what happened. He turned in way too early, considering he was trying to make a move on the outside. You have to be aware that you need to, you know, go a bit deeper into a corner at that point. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Obviously, I can expect this one might have a fair few differing ideas, but, yeah, that's my take on it at least. So, third clip. We're on Project Cars 2 with some very interesting graphical settings, and someone tries to go around the outside there, and it doesn't work. It's clearly, as we can already see from a slow-mo on the video, that didn't work at all. Now, who is at fault for this? So we got the black and orange car on the outside trying to go around the outside of the corner. We see that the grey car, silver car on the inside brakes a little bit earlier, as you would expect, because in reality, the black and orange car does have the racing line for the corner. And at this point, I think it's fair to say that the car that the black and orange car has is way ahead. You know, I mean, look at this. It's front axle of the grey car to rear axle of the black and orange car. So he's way ahead at this point. And as we saw just, a few minutes ago, if the car on the outside is more than half a car length ahead, by the time you get to the apex, he is within his rights to then continue the racing line, and it's up to the car on the inside to back out. When we were looking at the incidents previously, when it comes to going around the outside is so difficult because you have to make sure that you can be at least level, taking a slower line around the outside. But he is so far ahead on the outside at this point that I think he is, at least as far as the rules go, because he's carrying so much more speed, and really the line that the grey car is taking on the inside is so shallow into the corner that he's never going to make this corner with any kind of decent speed. So I think the black and orange car is, correct in the rules to continue his racing line and expect the car on the inside to back out of it, because he's nowhere. He's not going to carry the enough speed through to even challenge for the corner. And, if we switch it around and think that this was an inside overtake, the grey car is, nowhere near close enough to be able to effect an overtake at this point. Now, it's not necessarily the smartest decision from the black and orange car to, continue going into the corner like that in the first place, I would say. When you're trying to do an overtake around the outside, or you think you've got the line, you've got to be a little bit smart about it. And I would say that, leaving a little bit more space, he was going to get the overtake done anyway. He was carrying so much more speed around the outside. Essentially, by closing someone off like that, you're hoping that they're going to back off. The smarter decision for the black and orange car would have just been to, leave a bit more space on the inside, maybe take the line around here. He was going to be ahead by, say, this point anyway, and then he can continue on as normal. But as I've said sometimes in the previous episodes, not making the smartest decision doesn't necessarily also mean that it's your fault for an incident. And yes, he could have made a smarter decision and not been taken out, but I also don't think it's his fault for being taken out. I think the grey car in this one should have backed out of the move earlier than what he did. And you can even see that at this point he comes off the brakes. If he was entirely on the brakes and trying to avoid it as much as possible, then you could just put it down to a racing incident. But if you look at the brake lights here, he's on the brakes, then he's off the brakes there. He could have been doing more braking to avoid any kind of incident like this, but he doesn't. He comes off the brakes, and that ultimately, I think if he'd continued on the brakes, he would have been able to avoid that. So for me, I would personally put this more onto the fault of the grey car. You guys can let me know on the comments and the poll in the top right. It'll pop up on the card. Is it the black and orange car's fault for turning in anyway when someone was there, or should the grey car really have backed out of that one because he wasn't really in any state to be able to make the corner at any kind of speed and keep a position from that? But you guys let me know your thoughts, and we'll see what happens. So, final clip, Forza Motorsport 7. People were complaining that we didn't have enough Forza clips, and that's only because I can only review what is sent to me. If you want to submit your clips, the link's down below in the description. But yeah, I mean that looked a bit rough. And based on the driving of that car in particular, as we see, he just goes off completely. And the other drivers in this race, I can kind of understand why people, were wondering why there aren't any Forza Motorsport clips, because this looks like an absolute nightmare to try and do any proper racing in. But especially, I mean, I've got to say that one was entirely on the yellow car there. We're not specifically, looking at that clip in particular. That's not the one, but the black one, the black car did nothing there, and it, to be fair, probably looked like he was going to. And maybe in the Forza Motorsport world, you've got to kind of hit before being hit. I don't really know. I don't play the game, but yeah, it doesn't look like a fun environment to race in. But with all that being said, let's look at this specific incident. So we've got the car on the inside, much slower. We go around the outside here, but at this point, we're not far enough along the outside to be able to have claim to the corner. So let's carry it on. At this point, we're still just a little bit behind, to be fair, and we're also off the track. You can see that the white line is here. We've pretty much got all four wheels off the track. We aren't necessarily, as the yellow car, entitled to be here. And we've got the black car on the racing line. Now, you could say that this was an intentional takeout from the black car, and I wouldn't disagree with that because of all the other all the other incidents that we've seen in this even just tiny 30-second clip from Forza Motorsport 7. But regardless of any intention, I can't see. I wouldn't be able to put blame on the black car for this specific incident, because the yellow car isn't far enough ahead. He's on the outside of the track. He's trying to do an overtake around the outside. As we've seen from the rules at the very start, you've got to be level on corner exit to have any claim to the space, and we're not. I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of overspeed we've got. We're not level. I mean, we're very slightly behind, but we're still behind, and we're also off the track, which makes it even worse. There's, you probably can just see it. This is grass over here. So if we continued our line on the outside, we'd be in grass. So what the yellow car is wanting to do is have the black car move over this way to allow the yellow car to have some space this way. But he's not entitled to do that. The black car doesn't have to do that. He's still on the racing line. He's still slightly ahead of the yellow car, and he's entitled to continue his racing line on, regardless of the intention of whether that was probably intentional or not. I don't think the yellow car had done enough at that point to be warranting the space on the outside. If I was the yellow car, frankly, I wouldn't even be trying to race in these kind of conditions. Go to a different racing game, because this looks horrendous. But yeah, I can't. At the very least, I would put it to a racing incident, and just wash my hands of the entire affair. But from a serious racing perspective, I don't think that, when we're looking at outside overtakes and what you need to have done to effect an overtake on the outside and be warranting of the space, it was close, but I don't think the yellow car had done quite enough to be warranting of the space on that section. And I also don't agree with the way that he just randomly takes out a car further on the track as well, but we're not talking about that. But let me know your thoughts, obviously. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and also in the poll in the top right. Was the yellow car at fault? Was the black car at fault? You guys let me know. Some interesting, we've had quite a mix. We started off with a very easy one to handle, really, but some of the others have been quite difficult. So I'm always, I never expect you to just take my word for all these things, and I'm using the rules to try and educate as best I can. But there's also some clips that are very much on the edge, and I'm always happy to hear what other people think about them and better informed decisions overall. And nothing's ever, well, some things aren't quite as clear cut as what they seem, but a lot are. So yeah, feel free to let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Let me know if you're still enjoying these series as well. And we'll have another one of these next Wednesday as always. You can find in the video description all info and links that you may need to submit your own clips, and if you'd like to support me you can do so on Patreon by becoming a YouTube member or simply subscribing and liking the video. Thank you all so much for watching, I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.